Psychonaut crew, what is good? I am very excited to be sharing with you today's episode. I literally say that before every episode, but that's because I'm excited before every episode to be speaking on different topics. But this one is definitely more timely for me. And I feel like in general, it's applying to more people's lives than it has been before. And that's sober curiosity and dry January. So this past January, I decided to not drink. I went a month without drinking alcohol, which is the longest I've gone probably since I started drinking, like end of high school, early college, which is pretty wild to say, but there were a lot of things that came up for me. I have my thoughts. I overall found it to be a positive experience. And so I wanted to use the podcast today to share about why I went dry for this month, what my relationship with alcohol has been like before dry January, how it's evolved and changed. Like I feel like it has for so many people. And then in general, talk about this concept of sober curiosity and why I feel like more than ever, we're seeing a rise in the non-alcohol space with more non-alcohol beer or non-alcohol liquor options out there for consumers to have if they choose to not have alcohol for the night. So I'm very excited to talk about this. With that being said, let's get into a little bit more on my relationship with alcohol.
Party! Party! Fucking party.
So here's the tea on my relationship with alcohol, how it's evolved and changed over the past 10 years, we'll call it. More like 9 years, 8 years, but round up to 10. So like most people, I don't want to say like most people because I don't want to assume other people's relationships with alcohol, but I feel like I was pretty typical and started to drink towards the end of high school, but really didn't have much of a relationship with alcohol until I went to college. And where I went to school was definitely a big drinking school. And I'll call it out, went to Notre Dame, go Irish. I guess we really hold up the name Go Irish with the amount of beer that we drink on campus, especially for game days. And it was very much ingrained in the culture to go out, drink. I never described Notre Dame as a party school though, because I went to visit friends at state schools or even other smaller private schools. And they definitely have much more of a party culture than what we had at ND. Maybe that's changed since, but drinking was definitely a big part of the culture for game days, dorm parties, going out to bars. And so it kind of felt like if you didn't drink, then you were on the outcast of the social scene at Notre Dame, or it meant that you were one of the really religious Catholic kids who didn't drink. And there was definitely that represented at a Catholic school. So for me, it definitely fell in the camp of like, all right, well, have fun, go out partying. And my freshman year, sophomore year, into my junior year, definitely was a pretty big drinker. And it was mainly because that was the culture at the time and the people I hung out with were big drinkers. But what really drove that for me was underlying social anxiety and wanting to adjust to this new environment after having lived at home all my life and going away to a new environment, new school, making new friends. All that felt daunting for me, and an easy way to get over those nerves is to drink. And if everyone else is doing it, then that's super normal. And I feel like I speak for many kids who go away to college who they want to have that crutch or something to rely on to get over the hump of socializing and making new friends. So I realize my experience isn't atypical, maybe aligned with what the norm for most college students are. Maybe, again, I don't know if much has changed in 5 years. Probably not that much, but that was my experience with it. And I say that I was like a bigger drinker first half of college because halfway through college, I went vegetarian, really cleaned up my diet, started exercising more. That was when I was diagnosed with PCOS, and so became a lot more vigilant about what I was putting in my body. And I realized that alcohol made me feel like total shit the next day. And it got much worse versus like the hangovers of my freshman year or sophomore year. It just became more intense and it wouldn't require much for me to drink to get that hangover. I'll admit, I think I, in general, might be more sensitive to alcohol than most people, but especially going plant-based completely changed it for me. It was what took me like 10 to 12 drinks to feel like pretty gnarly the next day now only took like 4 or 5 beers And that's still, in the grand scheme of things, that's still like a good amount of alcohol anyway. But when you're a college student, you're like, oh my gosh, that was such a light night of drinking. I only had like 4 beers. Look at me go. I'm a health warrior. Again, that was like my 20-year-old mentality. And for me, it was more the emotional side and mental side of hangovers that got to me than the physical. I very much had like the stomach clenching, nausea, headaches, and that never felt good. But the anxiety component and like the Sunday scary component really had me feeling terrible after drinking versus that physical component. And I feel like I didn't really know what the Sunday scaries were until I got into college, and I was like, oh my God, I have all this work I need to do. And I also feel terrible and my body is detoxing from everything. This sucks. I hate this. So with that kind of ramping up, I feel like I consciously wasn't drinking as much. I also feel like I just subconsciously wasn't drinking as much either. I felt like I had grown more in my self-confidence, and that has only continued to grow. And I didn't need that crutch to get over the social anxiety as much as I had before when I was 18 and 19. So it was kind of like, okay, I just don't have the same motives to drink as anymore. And then also I hate how I physically and mentally feel after drinking a lot. So started to taper down more. And that has only continued even in the pandemic. When that hit, I obviously wasn't going out and partying like I had been before. And so I wasn't drinking as much, being at home with my parents. Like maybe we'd have a glass of wine here and there. But I may have gone a month without drinking during the pandemic. I have no idea. Don't actually remember because it was just such a blur. Being at home for 15 months, like kind of feels like Groundhog's Day. So I have no idea. Maybe I did. Maybe this wasn't my first go at like some sort of dry January. But all that to say, very much was drinking less, even coming out of the pandemic, moving into the city. I just kind of felt like I had my experiences with alcohol, and now I care more about my sleep and feeling better the next day. And also I'm feeling pretty good meeting people, making new friends. I just don't need that crutch as much. That kind of led me to where I was when I started dry January. And also I would say what's helped is I have a partner who's not that big of a drinker. We're very aligned in our views on alcohol, which I feel like is pretty unique when you're in your mid-20s. And yes, 26 is your mid-20s. It's not your late 20s. So many people have tried to tell me like, oh, I'm getting close to my late 20s. No. I feel like your mid-20s until you're 28. Do not correct me on that. I am right. Don't try to challenge me. Anyway, I feel like being in your 20s in general, there are still a good amount of people who are out partying and drinking like they were in college, and to each their own. But I find myself in the camp of people who are more sober curious. Maybe they're interested in making a mocktail or finding an NA beer when they go out versus having alcohol. And that could be for any sort of reason. I feel like the rise in sober curiosity can be around health. It can be around maybe you just don't like the taste of alcohol. I don't know. Or it could be improved sleep. There are just so many reasons for it. So I feel very lucky to be with someone who's more aligned in that with me than not. That's my relationship with alcohol. I'll just also sprinkle in there. I feel like as I've gotten older, I've learned more about issues with substances and issues with alcohol coming from both sides of my family. So I think that has also created this motivation in me to stay away from alcohol as much as I can or minimize it, because we have people who have struggled with alcoholism on both sides of the family. And I know that can be genetic or it can be like highly environmental. So trying to be mindful of those factors as well. And I know many people have evolved their relationship with alcohol for similar reasons, whether it's like seeing friends go through struggles with alcohol or seeing families go through struggles and making them reevaluate their own connection to it. So also kind of adding in there that also was a catalyst for me in college, and as I've gotten older, just becoming familiar with those dynamics within my family. That's that on the relationship with alcohol. Now I want to get into why I decided to do dry January and give you my thoughts and impressions and tips if you want to do a dry month.
Now we might have a surprise visitor. Do you know who it is?
I do.
Go and get him, Gypsy.
So this leads me to where I was at before I decided to do dry January. At that point, I had maybe been someone who would have like 2 to 3 drinks a week. So pretty light drinker, like maybe a drink at dinner during the week, a few drinks on the weekend. I consider myself a pretty light drinker, especially I feel like in your 20s, you still have a good amount of people who are out partying and drinking a lot. Like more sober, curious people are merging, but it's definitely not the majority. My reasons for dry January may have been different from someone who maybe they were drinking more heavily and wanted to reevaluate their relationship with alcohol. Whereas for me, I just wanted to do it for the challenge. I just wanted to see, would it be a challenge? I anticipated it wouldn't be that much of one, but was proved wrong slightly, and I'll speak to that in a little bit. And I also did it because my partner was up for it, and some of our friends were looking to do dry January, and I felt like it was something I heard more about in the industry that I work in CPG. We were hearing about more innovation, and NA, honestly, that's been something that's been going on for the past few years, is more non-alcoholic brands, whether that's NA seltzers, NA beers. I mean, it's crazy we live in a world where we have an NA White Claw, which is wild, but it was pretty good. I got it on discount on GoPuff, and I highly recommend checking it out. You may think it's a more expensive LaCroix, but more flavorful than you think. Anyway, a big component for me was, in general, feeling more supported by the landscape. There's just there are more options I can choose from when making a mocktail at home or going out to a bar than just like a Sprite or a juice. Felt excited to get creative with my drinks and mocktails, and so that was more my motivation for wanting to do dry January. And I was curious to see, if I'm someone who was a light drinker and went from no drinking, am I going to notice changes in my health or my hair or my skin or my sleep patterns, or is it going to be pretty minimal? And so I will speak more on that. But I kind of want to go through chronologically through January, things I noticed, and my thoughts and impressions. So after New Year's, went out, partied, woke up, and felt kind of like a little gross and groggy, and was like, okay, I'm ready to not drink for a month. Let's go. And actually, I didn't even drink that much for New Year's, but I was like, all right, we're done with this for now. The first week or so, I didn't really notice much of the impact of not drinking because it wasn't atypical for me to go 7 to 10 days without having a drink. So not much to really notice there or call out there. Felt like as we moved through the middle of January, I started to notice it more, and it wasn't really noticing changes in my hair or my skin or my sleep. It was more so, oh, I'm noticing this restriction more because in situations where I would order a drink at dinner, I'm not doing that. Or now when I am going out with my friends or going to a party, I'm not drinking, and I just feel more aware of my sobriety. And at points, it was just an awareness, and it wasn't necessarily accompanied by anxiety. But when I went out to bars or out with friends and people were having drink after drink and enjoying themselves, having a good time, I had moments where I felt a little jealous. I was like, maybe having a drink isn't so bad. Not to say I was tempted, but I felt like I had some FOMO in ways, at least in those moments. The next days, definitely no FOMO when people were not feeling good. But I just noticed it was a slight change in my usual pattern. And I kind of hate to say this, but I also realized how fucking annoying drunk people can be. When I had gone to bars sober, or this was a while ago, more so in college, I would sometimes go stoned, and it was funny to go to a bar in those settings and feel like you're an anthropologist watching people in the wild at the watering hole. And it was funny for me to be in that observer position. But I found for myself, I didn't have those same feelings. I kind of felt more annoyed and ugh, why are you acting like this? Why are you getting upset about this? Why are you reacting to this? And it made me not want to stay out that late. And so As a result, when I would go out to bars, I would, instead of staying out to like 2-ish, like I would before, I would stay out till like maybe like 11:30 or midnight and then be ready for bed. And that was also another interesting change too. Notice there was a slight change in my sleep patterns as a result. It was like in part going out and being like, oh, people are like pretty drunk. I'm feeling annoyed and don't want to deal with that. And then it was also, oh, I'm actually feeling tired and want to go to sleep now that I'm not drinking. Like I don't have that ramped up hype energy to go out. So that was interesting as well. And my partner's on the same wavelength as me. So we were like in our grandma era, going to bed early on a Friday or Saturday. Like I think a few times I went to bed before midnight and I'm like, who is she? Like what? Because I feel like that's a challenge for me to do even on weekdays. And I was like, whoa, now I'm doing this on the weekend. That's crazy. And then the next morning, I didn't feel that same groggy exhaustion. I didn't want to sleep in till like 11 or noon. I was ready to be up before 10. And like before 10 is still like kind of sleeping in. I feel like for most people, for me, that was like a big deal on the weekends because I love to sleep in, but I didn't feel like I needed to as much. So that was really nice. And goes to show that even if you are a light drinker and then go to eliminating alcohol, you may notice a slight change in your sleep, especially on nights where you would drink. So for me, it was less so like consistently my sleep was better. Like during the week, it was still like normal because I didn't really drink during the week. But on weekends, yeah, definitely improved. That was really cool to notice. And then like kind of moving through the month, like this plays on the annoyed with drunk people theme. In general, I felt like I noticed my emotions more during this month. And it made me realize that maybe alcohol had numbed out some of my emotions a little bit. Granted, also like greater color to the situation is weaning off of my SSRI in December. And I think there's still some carryover for that in January. I think most people in my life are like nodding their heads like, yes, it definitely did. And so for me, I felt more in tune with my emotions, which for the most part was good. And then other parts was like, I wish I didn't just because there was more anxiety that I noticed came up. And it was some anxiety in like social situations, some anxiety in terms of like how I felt in different like relationship dynamics. And I want to say all of that was for the better. Like all of that were emotions that I was like meant to feel and work through. But some of it was just the fact that I was restricting something out of my diet. And so my body was just waking up to this newer way of being. And I would imagine this is something that would happen more severely if you were a heavier drinker and then went from not drinking or went from drinking to not drinking. But for me, I even noticed it a bit being a lighter drinker. So I know you're probably wondering, you're like, Megan, you sound like you hate drunk people and you sound like you were pretty anxious. Like, was this month worth it? Hold on. I will say it was, because what some of that anxiety allowed me to do was use more effective tools for managing my emotions, like talking to my therapist, which like already was doing, but doing more mindfulness practices, breathing, and also relying on my support system, having people be in my corner reminding me everything's okay. Felt very supported during the month and I was very grateful for it. And then also kind of zooming out too, some other color to the situation is January is a winter month in the Midwest, and it was cold, it was dark, and we had a polar vortex, and that's tough enough to like go through in terms of like a toll on like your mental health if you have seasonal affective, and removing alcohol can amplify that a little bit, sometimes a lot of it. Anyway, those are my takes for my experience for dry January and how I'd felt during it. What I will say is I felt like it was an overall positive experience. Sleep improved. I felt like I got to bond more with my partner, which I really loved. It made me really excited how into the mocktail scene they were and making mocktails with dinner and getting excited for different combinations of ingredients and adding more bitter flavors or amplifying sour. They became like this cute little mixologist, and I just got to benefit so hard with these amazing drinks. So I felt like I got to bond more with my partner in that way, and then also bond more with other people who were doing dry January. Or in general, I feel like it led to more conversations around mindful alcohol consumption. I feel like if people didn't do dry January, I definitely heard more people do damp January. And even then, those people want to talk about reevaluating their relationship with alcohol. So I felt like as a part of this bigger collective group of people and this bigger conversation, and that felt really fun to be a part of and to know other people are challenging what was their norm as well. That is that on dry January. Next, I'm going to talk about my tips for anyone who is looking to do a sober month and where I'm at right now. Tip number 1 is, if you can, before you go completely sober for a month, try to taper off before that timeline. For me, like I said, like I think I was an offender of that because I did drink for New Year's and then went dry Jan 1. But like during the month of December, knowing that that was coming up, I felt like I was mentally taking into account, okay, it will be easier to do a month without drinking if I have one less drink tonight. So peeling it back layer by layer and taking those smaller steps before a long period of not drinking, I find is really helpful. And I think many people who talk about making diet changes in their life will say the same thing. Like, don't try to eliminate sugar right away. Try to pare it back a little bit. Maybe do like one less dessert a week and build on it from there. So that's my piece of advice for before you actually quit and do no alcohol for like a month or an extended period of time. Tip number 2, to the best of your ability, try to find a community of people who are also looking to go dry or maybe are already sober. This is helpful in many ways. It's helpful because you have other people who understand what you're going through. If you're someone in your 20s, maybe, for me, it feels more atypical to do a dry month versus if you're in your 30s or 40s. So for me, it was really helpful to have already people immediately in my life who are doing something similar. So to the best of your ability, find those groups. It can be a meetup group. It could be maybe a Facebook group. You never know. I mean, there are plenty of those groups that revolve around going out to a bar and drinking. I would assume that there are also sober groups as well for meetup or Facebook. And I'll actually look into that as a show note for this episode to make it even more helpful for someone who's curious. Tip number 3 would be experiment with mocktails. I feel like I went off about that when talking about my dry January experience. So definitely look into cool recipes. There's so many on TikTok and Instagram. I will share some in the show notes of different accounts that I really liked. So that is really helpful just to know that you aren't super restricted in what you can drink and you can have really awesome mocktails that don't just taste like juice. There are definitely ones that you can savor, especially if you play up the bitter flavor or play up the sour flavor. It makes you want to drink it more slowly and mindfully. Eva even made one that had Greek yogurt in it, which like maybe sounds gross to some people, but it totally slapped because it tasted like a creamsicle and it felt more filling and nourishing. I guess like in a way it was kind of like a mango lassi, but as a mocktail. So definitely experiment with mocktails, other options, especially if you're someone who's accustomed to having a drink with dinner or a drink when going out with friends. And I feel like that's similar advice for anyone who's looking to cut out caffeine. That's why there are caffeine alternatives or mushroom coffee alternatives. It's because alcohol is something that's super ritualistic in our society. So finding ways to replace that ritual with something that doesn't have alcohol is going to be really useful because it's still performing that same action, but without the consequences of alcohol. So mocktails, mocktails, mocktails. That's my advice number 3. Advice number 4, if you can, practice some sort of mindfulness during this month because like I said, I notice more emotions coming up for me and I imagine that may be the same for other people. So whether that's being aware of your emotions through journaling, through meditating, through deep breathing, movement yoga, whatever can get you in your body and give you the ability to process through emotions that are coming up is going to be helpful. It was very helpful for me and I imagine that would also be helpful for other people. My last tip, tip number 5, and this is one that I feel like relates to finding a support group, but find other activities that aren't just going out to a bar on the weekend. It can be really hard if none of your friends are doing dry January and you still want to hang out with them, but the more you can normalize your state in an activity or an event, the better you're gonna feel. Like I said, sometimes I felt like a fish out of water at bars or at parties because I wasn't drinking. But moments where I decide to stay in or have a game night or go to a sober bar, because in Chicago we have some sober bars and that's really cool, that made me feel a lot better. So find those spaces, maybe in your city or your town there are such sober bars, or there are more sober activities you can do, like a book club, some sort of game night with friends. I think that helped me a lot to feel connected and made me feel like I wasn't missing out on the socializing that alcohol and going out to bars had brought me. So those are my 5 tips. That is my experience with dry January. Where I'm at now, and what's interesting is where I'm at now is I've been drinking a little bit, but my hangovers somehow feel worse. This sucks, you guys. I feel like I've only had like about a drink on nights where I've had drinks. Like Valentine's Day just happened, had a drink out with my partner, and the next day it was one drink and I felt hungover and felt like that cotton mouth and dehydration. I was like, only one drink? My God, my body is a temple. So I've like since gone back to drinking, but I think I'm gonna be someone who drinks less than I had been even before dry January. So going from a light drinker to an even lighter drinker. And that's just because the effects of alcohol are more known for me. I don't want to be someone who completely restricts it from my life. I don't feel like that's something that I need to do. I don't think that that's necessarily the healthiest mindset for myself. I do think it's nice to have it on the table, and I think there is a way you can enjoy alcohol, have it be moderate and still feel good and not have it be detrimental to your health. So it'll be incorporated in my life in some way, shape, or form, but I may be someone who just has drinks for celebrations or events or weddings versus something to be done every weekend. I don't feel like my life is enriched by that as it was before, but I don't see the need to completely eliminate it. So that's the camp I'm in. I know a lot of people on TikTok have talked about that as well. They've gone sober for a longer stretch of time and they're now at this state of mindful consumption. And that may mean a drink a month or really a drink only when they feel like it. And maybe that's once every few weeks or whatever it is. But they're in the state of a more mindful, intuitive consumption versus one of compulsion, of numbing, and their lives are better off for it versus like that full-on restriction, because I tend to feel like a restrictive mentality can be more stressful in and of itself than the health impacts of having something in your life. That may be kind of a hot take, but that's kind of the camp I'm in as at the moment. And that may change, that may evolve. We'll see. Maybe it'll be another dry January in the future. But I feel like I have a better relationship with alcohol. I feel like I have a more aware relationship with alcohol. And I feel very grateful. I feel grateful to be in this time where there continues to be more innovation. I continue to have more support in my life, and there are more people I'm noticing pursuing sober curiosity, which I feel like is a big overlap with the mindful alcohol consumption community. So with that being said, Psychonauts, I'm super curious to hear if you participated in Dry January. Have you gone sober for a period of time? What are your thoughts on alcohol and your relationship with alcohol? Or what are your thoughts on the non-alcohol movement? So I'll be adding a poll for this episode. This will also be posted. If you're viewing this on YouTube, then you already are viewing this on YouTube. But if you're not, you can feel free to go into the comments of YouTube, type away, what are your thoughts about drinking? Has your relationship with alcohol evolved? Want to keep this an open forum and hear from people like yourself. So with that being said, Psychonauts, until next time, take care.